All right, hello everyone. I've got 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully a few more folks will trickle in as we get rolling. Welcome to today's webcast from the Chesapeake Stormwater Network. This is the second in our series on the Campus Stormwater series. Today we are going to be talking about climate resilience at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So we'll go ahead and get started with a couple of housekeeping reminders. So welcome. Hopefully a number of you have kind of attended some of these webcasts in the past. So sorry that we kind of go over these every time, but we do have a couple of poll questions at the beginning. Just answer in a way that best reflects your group. If you're watching with a group of folks, I know some of you check it out in a conference room or whatever. We have both the chat and the Q&A feature enabled today. So anytime throughout the presentation, go ahead and put your questions in the chat as you think about them. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. Ryan has also told me that he's happy for me to interrupt if something comes up that's timely on a particular slide or portion of the presentation. You may have heard, if you were here from the beginning, we are recording this session, so we will post the recording up on our website as soon as probably tomorrow. We'll try to get that up there before the end of the week. So if you have to jump off early or you want to share it with a colleague, you can do that. And then finally, we have a really short evaluation at the end, only 3 questions today, less than a minute to fill it out. Just lets us know that we're doing a good job and tells our funders that they should keep giving us money. One final reminder for our biennial stormwater professional survey. We are closing this survey tomorrow if you have not taken it already. This is a survey that we've been doing since 2011 at CSN, just to sort of take the pulse of the sector, of the field. We are looking for information about what are your capacity needs? What are your training needs? What are some of the barriers that you have? What are the tools that you are either aware of or not aware of so that we know how we can better support you all? We use this to inform our training programs. We also use it to pass along to some of our funding partners, funding agencies, so that they know how they can better direct their support as well. So the link to the survey is here. I will drop it in the chat sometime today if you want to go directly to it, if you haven't filled it out. It should take less than 10 minutes. It's a bit longer than our evaluations, but we really appreciate the feedback. And as a bonus, if you fill it out, you get entered into a chance to win a $100 gift card. So there's your incentive if all of the rest of that was not enough. We have, unfortunately, just one webcast left on the schedule. I just got news this morning that our third Campus Stormwater Series webcast with Old Dominion, unfortunately, there is a conflict with our speaker that just came up. So he will be unable to join us on the 24th. Hopefully we'll be able to reschedule that. Anyone that is already registered, I have your registration information. So if we're able to put that back on the books, I will let you know when the new date is so that you have that information. But otherwise, we have one more webcast coming up this month on bioretention design adaptations for a changing climate. So that's on May 31st. A really great presentation. I had the pleasure of seeing it at a conference that I was at recently, some work that's been going on in North Carolina, led by Hazen and Sawyer, but along with some other partners as well, kind of looking at different climate scenarios, different design adaptations for bioretention features, and sort of how that influence performance under those different conditions. So it should be a really interesting talk if you're able to join. Last reminder here, this is just, I'm going to continue to kind of put this teaser out there. We are really excited for this new training program that we are going to launch later this summer. So registration should open in mid-June for a program that will begin in July for what we're calling the Chesapeake Urban Stormwater Professionals Training Program. This is a free program, but really a comprehensive overview of everything you need to know to kind of get started or run a stormwater program at a local level. So sort of that practical piece, particularly for folks that are kind of coming out of school, graduate students, early career professionals that kind of need a little bit of that hands-on or practical experience for urban watershed hydrology, the restoration practices for the Bay TMDL, climate resilience, all of the minimum control measures for MS4 permits. We try to cover all of it in this series. It's going to be about 14 different courses. So we're going to be really flexible about how you complete that course and get your certificate through this program. So if you're interested, just keep your eyes out. You can sign up for our Stormwater Scoop newsletter. That's usually where we kind of post the first announcements about it. You can also keep an eye on our website or email me directly if you have questions. All right, so with that, I will go ahead and get our polls started. I'm going to launch them. We have 2 today, just like we usually do. The first is just, again, telling us who you're representing. Are you with a local government? Since this is a campus series, are you in academia, private sector, NGO, other government level? If none of these fit, let us know in the chat. And then if you scroll down, our second poll question today pops up at the same time. And it's just sort of, trying to figure out what's bringing you today. Are you working in the academic sector and kind of looking to hear about what others are doing? Maybe you work in a different sector, local government, state government, and you are trying to see what you can learn from these campus communities. Or you're really just interested in kind of the climate resilience topic, and really anyone that's kind of working in this space, you kind of want to hear what they're up to. I thought about a third poll question for locals here in Maryland about when Adley Rushman is going to debut for the Orioles, our big prospect. So my money's on tomorrow, but maybe we'll have to wait a little bit longer. So if you have any guesses or want to put any bets down, you can put those in the chat as well. All right, I'll go ahead and turn this around for folks. We have a really good spread in our audience today. I love that we have a lot of folks from the academic sector. That's really excellent. You're kind of our primary target with this series, although we have some good information for everybody. We also have folks kind of looking for that information on climate resilience across the board, as well as folks at the university level looking to learn more. All right, so that just brings me to a really quick one-slide introduction on this topic. We wanted to put together this campus stormwater series earlier this year for a couple of reasons. One of which is that these campuses provide a lot of opportunities for being, kind of creative and innovative in the stormwater space. A lot of these campuses have, space to work with. They're kind of under construction, almost what feels like constantly if you were a student at any particular time. So there's new stormwater practices going in. You have a workforce in some cases for research integrated with some of your programs. So there's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of headaches, right? A lot of times these are not priority programs on campuses. It's kind of tough to make the case for why these BMPs and stormwater management is important, or why the maintenance is needed as you continue to grow your inventory. So I think it was a good opportunity to sort of talk about some of these challenges and opportunities. We're also really trying to be cognizant of ways in which we can better partner with universities, both in order to bring in these lessons that they're learning, these research opportunities that are happening in these spaces, but also connecting with potentially, a young and diverse workforce that could be coming out of these schools. And so we want to try to form these relationships in the sector that maybe we haven't taken full advantage of in the past. So that brings us to our campus series. Like I said, we had a program with Morgan State University in March. You can check that out in our archives if you haven't seen it already. Again, hopefully we'll have Old Dominion in the future, and we'll continue to look for other opportunities to feature other schools as those come up. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker today. I'm really excited to have Ryan with us. Ryan Kometz is the Director of Sustainability at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Throughout the course of his career, he has worked on various types of environmental sustainability and climate change reporting, ranging from voluntary disclosures to regulatory compliance. He has worked on various stormwater projects up and down the East Coast, ranging from small industrial projects to large MS4 systems. Ryan takes a systematic approach to environmental data analysis and often leverages environmental intelligence to help engage and inform stakeholders. Ryan is a published subject matter expert on climate resilience and GIS engagement. Additionally, he holds credentials from the Institute of Sustainable Infrastructure as an Envision Sustainability Professional and APPA as a Certified Educational Facilities Professional. So thank you, Ryan. I'm excited to turn it over to you for a little bit of a different looking presentation today. So I'm sort of excited to see what that looks like. So go ahead, Ryan.
Thank you, David, for that kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to get my screen up here in a second. All right, so my name is Ryan Kometz. As David said, I'm at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Our stormwater, I'll go over it all, but I want to give a shout out to all the folks in our facilities department that are an integral part of UMBC's stormwater, and they started doing it long before I arrived here, and we'll probably be doing it forever, but we have an excellent team in our design and construction, planning, operational side, and my role is sustainability, is I just provide a very little bit of support. So today, really, I'm going to talk about UMBC, just give you a quick background. We're going to go over some best management practices and then dig into the meat of climate resilience overall. And once again, I just want to emphasize that if you have any questions, David's monitoring the chat for me. I do not mind being interrupted. And my whole goal here is to get through the presentation and then open it up, hopefully for questions or discussions towards the conclusion. So UMBC is where this little marker is here. We are in Baltimore County in Maryland, not too far away from Baltimore City, right by Catonsville. We're approximately 500 acres, 512 to be exact. We have over 80 buildings, 40 million square feet of buildings, approximately 100 different stormwater BMPs. We serve 13,000 students, and we have around 2,200 employees. So if you've ever been to BWI, you've flown right over us probably. So stormwater best management practices run the gamut. Here's a nice little graphic, and the majority of campuses probably have one of each at least, or several of these. But essentially you start at really the first conception, which is flow control. And the whole idea there is you're trying to reduce the runoff velocity. It's typically man-made. It can be what you see there, some riprap. It's considered mechanical. Then you get into detention and retention. Those are going to be your dry and wet ponds that you'll see. And I know everybody deals with maintenance issues, as do campuses, and sometimes your dry ponds are perpetually wet. However, both of those are two different types of BMPs that can be utilized. Basically, to give you a little extra storage, maybe some filtration, but you're basically trying to reduce your runoff, your flow, your velocity, your overall volume of discharge. And then we're getting into filtration. What is in the picture there is an example of semi-permeable pavers. Sometimes you'll have asphalt or concrete, and they don't have the grass in between, or even bricks now can do it. And basically, you're just trying to keep the sediment from getting in there as it filters down. You also have infiltration and treatment, which can come in the form of rain gardens or bioswales. So essentially, the whole purpose of a BMP is you really want to treat that precipitation where it falls, and you want to do your best to mimic the natural movement and processes associated with water. Ultimately, a BMP is trying to reduce or delay the volume of your discharge and runoff. You want to reduce your flow rate and lengthen the overall time of discharge. And then we're trying, especially in the Chesapeake Bay region, we're trying to fix the water quality. So by giving the water extra time to filter and to be exposed to biochemical processes, hopefully we can reduce some of the pollutants of concern that we don't want getting into the bay or into the bay's watershed. So UMBC utilizes right now a GIS type system to monitor our stormwater and our BMPs. So depending on the inspection criteria as designated by MDE, our awesome grounds folks go out on a regular basis and they hit all these BMPs on campus. You can see we have quite a few on our campus. And it ranges the gamut from a boring old dry swale to really awesome green roofs. Just to give people an idea of what we have on campus, you see the majority of BMPs are microbioretention. However, we have some permeable pavement, some green roofs, some more traditional things like a dry and a wet pond, some recharging facilities, some harvesting, a couple bioswales. So it really runs the gamut. But I'm just trying to emphasize that you're not necessarily locked into one BMP type. It's going to really depend on the overall landscape, the aesthetic you're looking for, what your soil geophysical properties are. But there are lots of different options out there. And there's a ton of great resources out there too for you to take a look at and try and figure out what fits best for your needs and your parcel, campus, facility, whatever it may be. So what happens is we go out on the inspection basis. Our grounds manager will then go in and click on one, and you'll have all your information that you need in here on the back end of our GIS database. And then he fills out an inspection form, and that inspection form gets routed over to basically a custom dashboard for our operations and maintenance folks, and also for our compliance folks, so that they can pull up the BMP based on its exact location, unique number, or its type. And we can see when it was last inspected, if there's any action items or corrective maintenance needs to it. Really, it's basically just taking what people used to do in a binder full of books or a notebook, binder full of pages rather, or a notebook, and just make it electronic. And then they have the option too to download it as an Excel or CSV. I just took a screenshot here. As you can see, since it's been up, we're at essentially 1,100 different entries, although our grants manager's working on them now, so we're probably about 1,200 because we have around 100 on campus. So how do we design them? Well, in Maryland, we have the Department of Environment's Stormwater Design Manual, and that gives you the minimum basis for design. We look at the peak discharge from TR 55 and TR 20, and you want to design basically for a 1 year, 24-hour event. And basically all that's being derived from precipitation data from TP 40. Great, cool. What does that all mean? Well, these are papers that have been done by the federal government over the years, and it looks at the overall precipitation rate. And here in this picture is an example of one of our newer places on campus. That's our Interdisciplinary Life Sciences Building, or ILSB, which is much easier to say. And as you can see, we have a variety of different stormwater BMPs that's leading up to the side of the building. The building essentially has two fronts, depending on where you are on campus. So that's one of the front sides. And that pathway that you see there was actually designed to mimic a stream that used to flow through that area of campus once upon a time. And then, as you can kind of see, maybe not from that angle, but right in this area, there's a little placard, and that contains some educational information about the type of stormwater feature there and the natural processes. And then if we go back to the rainfall depth, we're looking once again at that 1 year, 24-hour storm. And since I'm in Baltimore, I'll go with Baltimore, we're saying about 2.6 inches. Where this plays in with climate change and climate resilience are all those technical papers and technical resources were all done many years ago. Some of them date back to the 60s, some get up to the 1980s. Now you're starting to see a transition into NOAA's Atlas 14. And even Atlas 14 only takes you up to the turn of the millennium, into the 2000s. About a year ago, the Chesapeake Stormwater Network did an awesome presentation with MRSIA, and they've actually worked on coming out with climate-adjusted IDF curves for the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed. So depending on what you're designing for and what your risk tolerance is, you might actually have to, rather than designing for 2.6 inches with the anticipated impacts and effects of climate change, maybe now you're designing for 3.3 inches. So these are things to take into account. And then you also need to think about, okay, all my infrastructure on campus was designed to this earlier standard, these earlier precipitation rates. So am I going to jeopardize some of my campus infrastructure or my parcel's infrastructure if I design for a now more intense storm event? So these are all things that are going to play into each other, which brings me to climate resilience. Many of you have probably heard of the term. It's really picked up steam in about the past decade. When it's all said and done, it really boils down to how well can I adapt to the changing conditions? Can I withstand what's happening? And how easy/fast can I get back to normal? And essentially, resilience can take place at many different levels. So the state of Maryland could look at itself as a resilient, from a resilience lens and plan for it. The states around us, so if we include Delaware and West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and I'll just make DC a state for the purposes of this conversation, we could all work together to figure stuff out. Or it could go down to a county level, a municipal level, or even a campus level. And for those of you who are in private industry, there's actually many private companies out there that are starting to think of this from a continuity of business perspective. So maybe you have a distributed network of businesses, or maybe you just have one large campus. But essentially, you're trying to figure out, all from a natural hazard perspective, all the different things that could potentially impact your operating environment, your people, your facilities, how you can respond to it, and what we can do to basically lessen the burden on everybody and recover as quickly as possible. So in the university world, there's an organization called Second Nature. They used to be called AccuPuck, and Second Nature/AccuPuck, they came up with the President's Climate Commitment. That came out in around 2007, 2008. UMBC has been a member since then. And really what we're saying is, we understand that climate change is a threat. Climate change is coming. And as part of that, not only do we have a public signed commitment from our university president, but we also were required to draft and maintain a climate action plan. So UMBC, our climate action plan actually includes a whole suite of different lenses of resilience. So because we're a university, we obviously are looking at academics and engagement. I won't go into too much depth there, but essentially what we focus on there is, are we teaching about climate change? Do we have resilience plans for our faculty to continue to teach if they can't get on campus due to an event? How do we keep our students safe? On the engagement side, is there a general understanding of climate change? Climate resilience is self-explanatory, and we'll go into that further. Energy, we realize that the consumption and combustion of fossil fuels contribute to climate change. So how can we basically use less carbon intensive resources to reduce our footprint, but also on the energy conservation and reduction side, if we're able to have a super efficient campus, if we are to lose power and have to run off gen sets, it's kind of a resilience thing. If you have a building where you've converted all of your T12s over to LEDs, and maybe you're using cloud data storage, and you converted all of your exit lights over to LEDs as well, and it's not a lab building because those are very energy use intensive, but if you're able to do that, your gen set is going to have a little more redundancy and might be able to power more than the traditional fire life safety devices. From a landscape perspective, not only are we looking at stormwater BMPs and overall water conveyance, but you're also trying to factor in, okay, what are the damages done by the invasive species that are moving on campus? So we're looking at really the flora and fauna and trying to understand, is it a significant threat when it comes to managing our stormwater and precipitation, or is it a nuisance? So for instance, the emerald ash borer is taking out many of the ash trees. And if we lose an ash tree, it's not really necessarily a significant threat to our BMPs, but it could be a nuisance if it's blocking one. It could destroy inlet or outlet pipes, whereas maybe wavy leaf basket grass could end up becoming something that it starts to take over in a BMP area, and then the BMP may not function as it was originally intended. Or another great example, less on the invasive sides, is what if we go and we plant certain species that are not drought resistant or cannot take the increase in heat that Maryland is expecting. And we're trying to figure out all these various things so that when we do the best with the data and information available. We also look at transportation. How can we do things utilizing maybe electric vehicles? How can we utilize vehicles more efficiently? And then finally, waste. And that's really landfill versus composting versus recycling. So the picture here is actually just a quick little snapshot from our climate action plan. The picture with the traffic cones, that is on our campus. That is, there is a part of the Herbert Run goes through there. We're currently in that general area doing a huge stream upgrade project. We're stabilizing the channel. We're getting rid of all the invasives. But what you're seeing there is the aftermath from one of the big events that flooded Ellicott City. One of those events also undercut that culvert there and start to get into our road. And then the photograph below it is one of UMBC's green roofs on campus. And this one is actually on our event center. So UMBC, we're trying to really engage everybody. And I'm not going to read all this to you guys. And I just want to say, this is not a PowerPoint. It's a ArcGIS story map. And David will share the URL with you so you can look at it yourselves and play with it. But we've created this map for our campus to understand kind of what's going on. So we define resilience. We show where UMBC is in case you don't know. But then we kind of dig in even further. So we look at our ecosystem. We talk about our wooded areas, our wetlands, what's on campus. We're very fortunate in that we only have one FEMA flood zone on campus. And that's approximately right where my mouse is going. But we have several ponds on campus. We have lots of wooded areas on campus as well. And we're in super close proximity to a big portion of the Patapsco State Park. As you see, no matter how you look at it, we got the Patapsco River right here. We have several streams, the Herbert Run right here, and all that ultimately ends up in the bay. So really filtering our stormwater and slowing it down is super important because we don't want to overwhelm downstream, downriver infrastructure, and we certainly don't want to be adding pollutants to the bay. We talk about soils at UMBC, so we worked with some of our academic departments to understand essentially the hazard score for soils, and that's really looking at, I believe it's infiltration rate, its overall susceptibility to landslides, and it's using the USGS soil information. We also looked at steep slopes on our campus. Basically there, what we're trying to do is understand, okay, where's the potential for a landslide? I know we're not California. However, if there is a landslide that takes out a road, could that cause any problems? And what's really interesting is we've been very fortunate on our campus, but the one area that is identified as a landslide hazard is actually the one area that the campus has seen a significant soil landslide and did some damage, and it's right by our library. Unfortunately, that was discovered after the fact. We talk about wetlands and flood zones on our campus. We have several federally delineated wetlands on our campus. And then there is one FEMA flood zone that I had mentioned is right in this general vicinity. Whoops. Oh, I'm sorry. My computer froze there for a quick second. Urban Heat Island is another topic that is gaining a lot of traction. If you pay attention to the news or municipalities, and a really interesting kind of thought process with that is you have folks that are trying to understand how we can combine BMPs with greening space, and can we do it on a scale large enough to start to mitigate some of that urban heat island effect. So for those of you who don't know what urban heat island effect is, it basically means that highly developed areas, they trap more heat when it's warmer out in the summertime. That's why if you go into Baltimore City in the middle of July, it's going to be a couple of degrees warmer than if you were, say, out in Frostburg, where you have a lot of rural areas. And so some of the ways that you can mitigate that are you can do white roofs, you can add more green space. UMBC has several green roofs on our campus, and all of those green roofs help to slowly mitigate some of this urban heat island effect. There's a lot of work to be done on that, but it is something that is happening, and we're trying to figure out the best way to do it. So one thing that's relevant to all the folks in here that are not from Baltimore is FEMA published, I believe it was last year, their National Risk Index. And it looks at 18 natural hazards, but it also looks at socioeconomic vulnerability as well. And it allows you to understand your overall county's resilience to risk and what natural hazards are at the biggest risk. You can also set it up to go by census tract. It just takes significantly longer to load them. So if I click on Baltimore County, it has some older census information, the building values, your area. You know, that's sometimes important. If you're in a flood zone and you're looking at FEMA data as well, you can maybe extrapolate some information out. But what's really cool is you can understand your annual loss, your overall risk rating, and then it goes through basically all the different natural hazards. So Baltimore County, we're at 0 risk for avalanche. However, coastal flooding, you know, we could have some. We're not really on the coast, but there's a little bit of influence. Whereas if you click on Baltimore City, you're going to get a, well, this also says very low for it. However, David had mentioned ODU down in Norfolk, Virginia. So I'll just scroll down there and I'll click on on Norfolk, and I bet you their coastal risk flooding is going to be fairly, oh, it's still relatively low. So I was wrong there. There are 18 different things. I encourage you to check it out if you haven't some time. And then MDE publishes some interesting things. We have a biodiversity index, and really all I'm looking at there and the campus is looking at there is connectivity of habitats. So that really dark green area is going to be basically the state park, the Patapsco State Park. As you move over here towards UMBC, this area in here, the lightish green, that is our Sarah research conservation area. And then we have some other heavily wooded parcels throughout campus. And there it's really trying to figure out, okay, where's our best chance for the greatest biodiversity? And how do we monitor those areas for invasive impacts like I was discussing? Flood mitigation. This is another very interesting resource provided by MDE, and it looks at the level of potential overall for mitigating floods. So a simple scale from lowest to highest. It was just something interesting to show basically to some of our folks on campus. We're not overly inundated with floods, but it is a concern. Unfortunately, this data, I believe, is from 2018 and they haven't updated it yet, but it is something, if nothing else, to take a quick look at, and it is neat to understand. It would probably be better applied at a county scale as opposed to such a relatively small parcel in the grand scheme of things. And then they have a carbon sequestration as well. And that's essentially based on biodiversity in soils, also an MDE data layer. And that's very important for our campus because we're trying to understand, okay, where are valuable areas? And once again, you see that dark blue, and that's that conservation and research area that we have on campus, and understanding that, okay, it has the highest ability to sequester carbons. It's the most biodiversity rich. It's providing natural services for stormwater. What can we do to keep it going? The other thing you probably noticed all these words scrolling on the other side, and this is our overall climate resilience set of plans and goals. So we want to understand the impact of invasive species on our canopy and also just our natural areas in general. We want to understand the risk of habitat shift. So are new invasives coming in? Are the regional appropriate species dying out or moving away? And also, what bugs and critters and diseases do we have to start thinking about? From the built environment perspective, we have gen sets on campus, but what good are gen sets if we can't get more diesel fuel to them, especially if they're not dual fueled? Really understand how well our energy is utilized, where we can cut some back. For instance, say we end up in a situation like they unfortunately have out west, where you have rolling blackouts or brownouts. So can we curtail a little bit? How can we use things the most efficient? Or the example I gave earlier about having the gen sets power more than just fire, life, and safety. Looking at transit routes, so UMBC has a transit system, and we actually were able to utilize some of the data collected by the Maryland State Highway Administration and also Pew Charitable Trusts. And it looks at all of the flooding events that occur outside of FEMA flood zones on state-owned roads. And it's about 75% of those incidences do occur outside of the FEMA flood zone. That's something that we're thinking about too. How will it impact our transit? Why is this happening outside of our flood zones? Once again, that has to do with climate change, and FEMA flood zones are not predictive, they're historical. So they're not predicting where a flood will happen. They are merely saying it's happened here X times. And it's important to think about that when you're in a planning mode. And then socioeconomic. We're looking at supply chain continuity, and we're also trying to understand how vulnerable our campus community members are to extreme events, which brings me in really to the last set of it. So we actually took our student population and our faculty and staff and employees, and we ran some scenarios here on the National Risk Index to understand, how many of our folks are living in an area where they potentially will be exposed to different climate factors or risks. And as you see, here are the 18 things that I was stumbling over. So you have avalanche, coastal flood, drought, it runs the gamut. But really understanding where all those folks live and approximately what they are the most vulnerable to having to deal with. And so we created this little tool here. It's a dashboard that'll tell you overall where our population is, their overall risk, and trying to understand, what our folks are most vulnerable to and how we can effectively communicate with them about how to manage those risks and what it means overall for their life, their day-to-day activities. With that, I'm going to turn over to discussion as promised. If you need to get in touch with me, my email is just rcometz@umbc.edu, or you can email sustainability@umbc.edu. It goes to me anyway. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I would love to open it up for questions, comments.
Thanks, Ryan. Really great. I went ahead and put the evaluation survey link in the chat. I hope you stick around for a little bit of Q&A. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat or in the Q&A feature. I will go ahead and kind of start you off with one, Ryan. I think one of the things we hear a lot, or at least I've heard in my conversations with other, campuses and universities, is that sometimes one of the most challenging things for stormwater programs more generally is sort of building the case for support, financially in terms of the, staff resources and things like that in these programs. So I was wondering, sort of what you found, in terms of administration support and how you've been able to successfully make the case, not just for sort of regular, stormwater programs with your existing BMPs and whatnot, but then kind of taking it to the next level and saying, look, we need to be looking ahead at these climate adaptations as well.
So at UMBC, we have a climate action steering committee, and that committee has been charged by our university president really to talk about the climate change impacts. So anything that we've been really pushed to talk about those topics or to consider those things have gone through the climate action steering committee. And so the way it works is there are a couple of different subgroups, working groups, and then they get together every so often to the actual steering committee, and they make certain recommendations. We should look at this, or we should try to do this. However, I'll also say our design and construction and planning folks are very forward thinking. So there was already this culture embedded at UMBC that I walked into. So it wasn't too far of a stretch to ask them to start thinking about rather what happens 10 years down the road to, we know Maryland's going to be 3 degrees warmer and get X amount more precipitation by 2040. I understand not every campus is that fortunate. So really one of the strategies that I always try to convey to different people is you want to talk about that risk mitigation. So you want to talk about risk first off to your campus community, your people. For instance, if you know that a parking lot is always going to flood, if it floods really, really badly, you don't want your students out there. You don't want your employees out there. Then after that, you want to shift to risk to the overall building or infrastructure. And then finally, risk to your continuity. I mean, obviously, if we have a Category 4 hurricane coming over us, there's going to be a disruption. But the question is, how quickly can we make the campus go back to where it was pre-hurricane? So really focusing on that whole risk mitigation strategy, I have found is probably one of the better ways to go about it, as opposed to necessarily talking about, climate change and carbon emissions, really honing in on, yeah, we know that the precipitation rates are increasing and flooding is increasing, and it's going to hurt us. So how can we make sure that it hurts as least as possible?
Great. Have you seen any, this is kind of early days in terms of some of these things, especially like the Marisa projected IDF curve tools and things like that. Have you started to see the implementation of any changes to operations, whether it's like maintenance schedules for BMPs or, actually using some of these projections in design yet? Or is it still kind of in those planning phases, kind of, figuring out what approaches you want to take as a campus?
It is in those planning phases, but for example, at UMBC, we are going to have a climate core fellow. It's a fellowship through SEI. That's the name of the company or organization. They're out in California, and that individual, they're going to be working on basically mapping an inventory of invasive species on campus. So we're going to grid out the campus, and we suspect and anticipate that there's going to be some issues around our BMPs. And there are a few BMPs where we know that there are, for instance, woodies growing on a bank. But we suspect that those invasives are going to play a role in it. And how much of it is climate change versus how much of it is just there's some invasive species, we'll determine that down the road. As far as the IDF curves go, the state of Maryland have passed legislation this past session called Maryland Climate Solutions Now that has a big impact on state government and our planning. And state government now has to consider the impacts of climate change. So MDE is trying to figure out what that's going to mean from a stormwater perspective and how that might adjust our stormwater manual. And for those of you who don't know, Maryland's stormwater manual, I believe it was last updated in 2009 or 2011. So it's due for a data upgrade.
Right. Unless there are any other questions that come in through the chat, I just had one more for you, Ryan. And it's sort of, I'm really interested in that, kind of index for understanding risk to the student population. And I'm sort of curious, normally I would assume these types of programs are very much focused on risk level to students sort of while they're on campus, but it sounds like this approach is kind of looking at the student body and sort of the risks that they're going to carry if they are virtual or commuting from other places and things like that. What does that kind of look like when you have, the student body the size that UMBC does in terms of kind of messaging and communicating when they might be coming from such a diverse range of risk types and locations? Is it sort of finding priorities, or, what are the top ones that kind of hit on that index?
So it's actually not really on the index, but right now we're focusing on air quality. So we're trying to, that's a whole separate program that I didn't tie into this because this is stormwater.
Right.
But air quality is a big one, and that's been informed by our stakeholders on campus. From the climate messaging, a lot of folks are usually it's, can I get to school? So really understanding the implications basically from nuisance flooding on the major routes to and from campus. I suspect, though, if we do have a hurricane roll through, that'll raise its head. But for the most part, it's been flooding, and air quality is the other one.
Actually, I fibbed. I had one other question for you since we still have a couple more minutes. It just popped into my head, and it's sort of on the engagement with the actual student body in some of these efforts. Have you, either through faculty, in terms of student internships or research programs, or just from kind of discussions and, opportunities for students to provide input on these resilience programs and initiatives, what has that process been like?
Challenging during COVID. But yes, so we do have students and faculty on all the working groups of the Climate Action Steering Committee. And then my office is an office of two, and we're always engaging with students and faculty. Sometimes it's more informal engagement, and other times it's working side by side with a primary or researcher and their labs to figure out what we're doing. So UMBC has a lot of folks that are working, like in Ellicott City, on flooding and flooding notification. We have a lot of folks doing remote sensing, really all over the world. But some are focused right here in Baltimore as well. So it's a little bit of both. And the way we try to do it is every fall we pick up on what the topics of interest may be for the campus. And we try to take a holistic and systematic approach to integrate those topics and also address climate resilience as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ryan. I really appreciate it. And if any of those students, would be interested in careers in stormwater or, watershed restoration, maybe put them in touch about the urban stormwater professionals training that we were going to get rolling this summer.
Oh, we'll advertise it. Don't worry.
Yeah, we can stay in touch. So, well, thank you again. This was really a great presentation, very interesting stuff. And I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how some of these initiatives kind of catch fire across different campuses around the watershed and beyond. One last reminder for folks, I do have the evaluation for today's webcast in the chat. If you want to follow that link and take a second, there's also the survey link for our Stormwater Professionals survey that closes tomorrow evening. and then a couple of other links to interesting resources for you as well. So I'll leave the room open for just a minute after we log off. If anyone wants to kind of save those in their browsers, it'll also be available once I post the archive recording tomorrow.
And David, Jessica posted a chat in the Q&A.
Oh, great.
So Jessica's asked, do you engage with adjacent communities to do joint projects that may minimize stormwater impacts that come from off campus? Joint projects, as in actual physical infrastructure, not at this time. However, what we do is we're really close to Arbutus and Cadensville. And so we do work with both of those communities, and we try to do community cleanups, try to understand where our trash is going, or suspended solids to try to mitigate that for those folks. We also support them in their efforts to become designated sustainable communities in Maryland. As far as the actual infrastructure projects go, we haven't gotten to that part yet. And I honestly think that's just that's one of those weird things where we're state funded, they're county funded or municipally funded, and stuff that I don't understand. So no infrastructure, but yes, on engagement and kind of softer stuff.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Ryan. We'll go ahead and let folks go. I will stop the recording here in a second. And then, like I said, hopefully I'll get all of these materials up by tomorrow at the latest, if not early next week. So if you want to check anything out or miss anything or revisit anything, you can do that.